So we just talked about types of chromosomal and genetic mutations last week. So what we're going to talk about is how those actually change what we look like and how we actually are as different species through evolution. So yesterday we had that dog breeding activity where we made different types of dogs. So what that was called was selective breeding, and that's where humans get to pick out the traits that they want or desire out of certain offspring. So, for example, if we wanted a fast racing dog, then we needed to breed two medium to large dogs with good leg speed and with a good work ethic. And so we had to look for those different characteristics to make that type of dog. Now, not every type of offspring or kid has their traits picked out by humans. So what that is called would be natural selection, and that's what we're looking at today. And this is where mutations, which happen randomly in nature, are selected for through mating. And so here's what we're going to talk about. Let's say that you live on an island. And on this island, the only food that you can find is in the ground. And it's in these deep, dark holes that are really small. And you want to get the food out of those holes, but having a 5-fingered hand is too big to get inside that little hole. So we have a starvation problem. People can't get their food. Well, let's say that you have a kid, and just by a random genetic mutation, one of the types that we talked about last week, that kid has only 4 hands. Without having that four fingers. Without having that 5th finger or the thumb, they are able to get inside the hole and get the food out. And so this kid of yours that has 4 fingers is more likely to get the food, and therefore they're going to have a better chance of reproducing with others. Why? Because basically, like when you guys date and you have a certain type, their type on this island scenario is going to be the person who can feed themselves. And so they're going to mate with the person who has 4 fingers on his hands. What's going to happen? Well, the kids from them are mostly going to have 4 fingers, and then your population over time will evolve from 5-fingered people to 4-fingered people. That is what natural selection is. The mutation that caused us to have 4 fingers was completely random. But the fact that that 4-fingered mutation was good and allowed us to feed ourselves better, that was not random because of the situation and the environment that we were living. And so what that means is if you have a mutation, but it's good for you, and other people recognize that, you are going to be more likely to reproduce and pass on your mutation. That is natural selection. So your environment in which you're living, the fact that it's good and it complements your own mutations well, means you are going to be well off and you are going to be able to reproduce. That is what natural selection is. So in terms of artificial selection, where we get to pick our traits, so like we get to breed certain types of dog or certain types of food to get the type of food we want, that's us controlling other animals or other species or other plants and how they mate. So we can do that with dogs or pets, we can do that with foods, we can do that with humans in terms of gene editing like we talked about a couple weeks ago. So if you like vegetables, if we look at kohlrabi, kale, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, and cauliflower, we have 6 vegetables here. 6 distinct vegetables that come from one plant. And this plant is the mustard plant. So if we look over here, Brassica oleracea, which is wild mustard, has basically been bred for different characteristics. So this is artificial selection. So we've got, if we wanted to breed for mustard plants with really big stems, over roughly 500 years, we get kohlrabi. If we wanted to breed for the leaves of the mustard plants, over 500 years, we could get kale. If we wanted to breed for the flower buds and the stems, we could get broccoli. Oops, my bad. And you guys get the picture. So what we're doing is we are breeding for different traits of the mustard plant. For example, flower buds. That happens in springtime when on the stem we have a bud that hasn't become the flower. What color is it? It's whitish yellow. If we go to the mustard plant, when the flowers are in full bloom, they are yellow. But before they bloom, they're kind of whitish yellow, which is basically really small versions of cauliflower. So again, that is artificial selection. Again, we have the domestication of wolves into dogs. And this happened over about 15,000 years. So like I said yesterday, humans bred wolves, an early tribe of humans bred, a pack of wolves with desirable traits. And we were able to have a partnership where we could feed them and protect them, and they could protect us as well. And so we eventually created domestic companions, or good pets, and those are now dogs. It's widely believed that dogs are the first domesticated animals. But what about us? Here's the thing. So if we look at where we came from, these are skeletons of different animals that are surviving today. So these are different types of apes. That's a gibbon. If we look at the gibbon, he's got a really small rib cage, really long arms. In fact, if he bumped his elbow with his knee, he'd probably keep spanking the guy in front of him. And then we have a pretty small skull, so our brain probably wasn't too big. And then if we have an orangutan, if we're an orangutan, then we got a bigger rib cage, we're shorter, still got pretty long arms, and a really big sassy jawline, which ape chicks probably dig that. And then if we go to the chimpanzee, it's got a little bit less of a jawline compared to the orangutan. Similar rib cage, shorter arms. And then we go to the gorilla. Well, it's got a really nice neck. Hey. And then it's got our sassy jawline again. And then we got a bigger rib cage, and it's all around pretty much bigger. And then we get to us. So we have all those same bones, but we don't have the sassy orangutan gorilla jawline. And we also get annoyed by the fact that the gorilla keeps breathing on our neck. Just kidding. We have a smaller rib cage. We have a longer spinal cord that stands more erect. And then we have a very short tailbone and shorter arms. And this allows us to walk more on 2 legs instead of 4. So human traits are the result of natural selection. So what that means is that we have these adaptations. We walk on 2 legs. We are able to use our hands to make tools. We are able to chew food with our jaw. We are able to breathe in our nose and through our mouth. We are able to walk long distances with little energy expended. So what that means is that we have been able to keep reproducing. And so what that means is that we survive and reproduce, and then we're able to perpetuate our species or continue having kids. If you are not suited for your environment, then you're going to die off and you're not going to pass on your genes. So here's the difference between evolution and adaptation. Each one of you can adapt. So you guys are able to change your habits to suit your environment, but you cannot evolve. Evolution only happens in populations over time. So what that means is individuals, meaning each one of you, adapt, but populations evolve. You cannot evolve. But you as a population over multiple generations can evolve. And here's certain adaptations that we have evolved over time. So we can, most of us, digest milk, the lactose, the milk sugar. We can sweat. We can walk on two legs. And we've also gotten sickle cell anemia, some of us, which is resistant to strains of malaria in Africa. So where did this idea that natural selection is driving our evolution come from? Well, it came from this guy, Charles Darwin, who, when he was roughly 20 years old, went around the world in a boat for about 5 years. That boat was called the HMS Beagle. And he stopped at this place called the Galapagos Islands, which is off the coast of Ecuador in South America. And that's South America, by the way. He noticed that tortoises had different shells based on the island that they inhabited. So if you're a tortoise on this island, you might have a different shell than a tortoise on that island, vice versa. And finches, which are a type of bird, had different bills or beaks based on which island they lived on. And we'll look into that here. Saddle-shelled tortoises lived on a dry landscape, meaning they had to reach up with their neck. So if we're a saddle-shelled tortoise, then what that means is this kind of looks like a horse's saddle. Well, since it rises up right here, this guy can reach up. And since he can reach up and get food, he can get his food high off the ground. But this guy can't really reach up. Okay, there's no hole there that allows the neck to extend. So with that gone, then this person has to eat their food off the ground only. So they can't reach up and get food up here. So if your food is high up, then the turtles with that mutation are going to survive on that island. But if your food's on the ground and not so much up here, these guys are going to survive on that island. So depending on where your food is, you're going to have a different shell of tortoise. The birds, on the other hand, had 15 different species. And so what that means is that there were birds that had beaks of different sizes. So there was a large billed, and they could get these harder seeds that were bigger and harder to bite. Small billed finches could get in those tiny little holes for their food, and they were better off with the soft seeds. So here's what happens. Here's the different bills. So we have this guy who's got our biggest bill yet. He's going to eat really big, hard seeds. Okay? This guy, there's no way he could eat that. That's not going to happen. But what he can do is he can get into tiny little holes and get smaller seeds. So he can probe through these holes and get small, hard-to-find seeds that this beak is too big to fit in. So you have the different types of food for the different types of bills. And different types of food were on different islands, and so you had different birds on different islands. Now, biological fitness, so survival of the fittest, does not mean your physical fitness. No. It means that you are able to mate and reproduce and make an offspring that can in turn keep reproducing. So that means you're able to have kids. So if you're fit, you can have kids. Speciation is probably the most tricky thing to remember on this. Here's what speciation means. It means that you are able to have a kid. So you have a kid. And that kid can have a kid. Well, isn't that what I just said? Yes, in a way it is, but here's what I mean. We cannot reproduce with a chimpanzee and have a kid that can have a kid. Other examples of sterile offspring are mules. So a mule is the hybrid between a horse and a donkey. A mule can't reproduce. It can't make a kid. So that is a limit of speciation. What that means is that if you're a horse, if you reproduce with a donkey and make a mule, the mule can't make another mule. So a mule is not its own species. It's just a cross between the species of horse and the species of donkey. And this is called reproductive isolation. So another example would be a liger, so a lion and a tiger. They make a liger. Now, ligers are weird because if you're a female liger, you can actually reproduce, but if you're a male liger, you can't reproduce. So they're still not their own species because a liger can't reproduce with another liger. It just doesn't work because only one of them is fertile and the other is sterile. Sterile means you can't make sperm if you're a male. So, in terms of humans, we can't reproduce outside of our group and make kids that can have kids. So that is called speciation. Competition is when we compete for resources such as food, water, and space. So resources are limited, meaning that we can run out of them. So if we run out of food, water, or space, organisms aren't going to survive anymore. So if you lose a competition and you can't go somewhere else to get what you need, then you're going to die. It's that simple. When a population reaches this peak size based on the available resources, so let's say we have 4 apples a day in one room, and each one of us only needs 1 apple a day to survive. So if we have 5 people in this room and there's only 4 apples and you only need 1 a day, then we have exceeded what's called our carrying capacity. So that 5th person is going to starve. So when you don't have enough food to support as many people as you have, then you are going to die off until you have the right amount of people. Or if you have way more food or a surplus of food than you need, then there's going to be more of you until you get too many people. So here's what you need to know. Difference between artificial and natural selection. So this means we're selecting for traits of other organisms. Natural means that that our mutations are good or bad. And if you have good mutations, then you're going to be able to mate and keep passing them on to future generations. If you have bad adaptations, then you're going to die. Charles Darwin is responsible for the theory of natural selection because of his findings on the Galapagos Islands with the turtles and the birds, or the finches. And natural selection is our ability to adapt to environmental changes and survive and reproduce. Remember that individuals can adapt, so you guys can adapt, but you cannot evolve. Only as a group of people can you evolve over multiple generations. And we cannot reproduce outside of our own species. So we can't have a baby with a duck and that baby will not be able to reproduce. Okay? You can only reproduce with other people and have kids that can reproduce. And then survival of the fittest means that you can reproduce and make an offspring. And your adaptations are good enough to be able to reproduce. And that's it.